IMF, the Interoperable Mastering Format. And this is really a new paradigm for the distribution of content. Now, standards are dull. I'm the first to say that, and there's a lot of standards, and they are exceedingly dull, but from dull standards you get exciting business. The standard for IMF is simply ST2067. It stands for the Interoperable Mastering Format, and it was designed by listening to users. So essentially, this isn't a bunch of eggheads sat in a room figuring out, wouldn't this be a good thing to impose upon the industry? It was actually studios, post-production houses, distributors, versioners, sitting down and figuring out what it was we needed to do something different to shipping tapes around the planet, or files that look like tapes, and to deliver something a bit more like GitHub for media. How can we build flexible, automated processes? And it's automation is the key to this. If we can take all the dull drudgery out of making thousands of versions, then actually, if we can automate that well and efficiently, then anybody can make thousands of versions. For your information, the film Inside Out from Disney, or Pixar, distributed by Disney, had over 40 editorial versions and over 1,000 technical versions. So you multiply 40 by 1,000, and that's more fingers and toes than I've got. And Disney was able to invest in that many versions of the movie because that helped them make a lot of money. Now, if we reduce the cost of doing that by a significant fraction, then suddenly anybody could do that kind of thing, and they could monetize to increasingly smaller markets and tailor the content for that market appropriately. And that's really what IMF's intended to do. It's intended to allow you to get that scale, either within a facility or between facilities, so that multiple vendors can work on the same title, and you can scale from tens of versions to many tens of thousands of versions. And my belief is that it's actually going to change the business of content distribution. The cost will get down so low that you'll exchange content differently. There we go. So what is the problem that IMF's actually trying to solve? Well, really it's a simple manufacturing problem. What we're trying to do is take a title, there we go, and we're trying to get it to a variety of different distribution endpoints. And anybody who's tried to do this will figure out that you need to build some kind of factory, and you need to go via a bunch of intermediate type formats, and somehow you have to then figure out the logistics of moving all of that stuff to all of those different endpoints, even when you're up into thousands of different versions going to tens of thousands of different receivers. But it's more than just a delivery problem. Despite the best efforts of the French and the English and the Spanish and the Dutch back in the 1600s, the planet will insist on speaking a whole bunch of different languages. We fail to standardize on English or French or Dutch or whatever. So we have to actually tailor not just the editorial content, but we've got to get the language right. And in fact, in some parts of America and other territories, you don't even have a uniform legal framework amongst all the different distributions in a particular territory. So in the worst possible case, we figured out there are 22 different versions of a movie that has nudity and swearing and violence to hit all the different state laws for each of the different states. 22 is the maximum number of versions that you could do just inside the United States. So somehow, we've got to try and build a generic format that's going to allow us to do that. And so this is what we wrote down. I will be testing you on this later on. You don't get a drink until you can name 3 of those standards. And no, that's not true. We've written a lot of bits of paper, but that's all they are. They're just dull standards. And those dull standards are actually all fairly slim documents. And they're based around some core constraints which tell you how IMF is supposed to work. It's basically a bunch of MXF files that contain media and a bunch of XML files that contain metadata. And the media is organized according to things that we call applications. So JPEG 2000 is app 2. The MPEG-4 simple studio profile is app 3. There's an archiving application, app 4, which is being used in France at the moment for archiving movie masters. And there's a new one that's just been published since I made this slide, which is the ACES profile, which is for movie production. So we've got ways of interchanging content for different specific applications. But all of those standards actually depend on all of these standards, and if you stacked all the paper up in a great big pile, it would probably be about as tall as a medium-sized chief scientist. And obviously, that's a lot of paper. And the only way that we're going to actually get all of that stuff to work is by having interoperability tests. And there's been a whole bunch of interoperability tests that have taken place over the last couple of years, where we've had up to 20 vendors exchanging files, exchanging content, and proving that this thing's going to work on day one as soon as it hits the shops. And one of the key features of IMF is to handle the wouldn't it be nice problem. So here's another Disney title. As you go to different countries, you actually have different title sequences that go into the movie. Wouldn't it be nice if you could handle that without having to render out 50 full-length movies, because that's the way that it used to be done. And in fact, in many places in the world, it still is done. But it's not just the title sequences. Disney also renders out different posters and different inserts to make certain that the language is right and the feel is right for each of the territories that they distribute to. Disney and Pixar both have this mindset that if there's anything that visually takes you out of the story, then that shouldn't be in there. So they go to great lengths to try and make certain everything is right for the territory they're delivering to, and that's why they make so much money. So the way that IMF does this is essentially by creating a nice, simple edit decision list. So here, for example, might be the English master version. The English master version, when you send it to someone, you send the English title video clip, the main video clip, the English end credits, you send the English audio, and there's this thing called the CPL, which is an XML file, which actually just points to all of that and says, this is the master original version. You zip it up, it's about 100 gigabytes, and you send it off to whoever needs it. Now, you want to send out the French version. Well, because it's French, you whip out the English title sequence and you put the French title sequence in. You put some French end credits in, some French dub credits, and some French audio, and you have a new CPL that points to all of this new stuff. Well, given that the receiver, the person who's doing the work on the IMF, already has the master English version, why send all of that stuff again? That tends to be what we do today. We ship DPX sequences, we ship ACES sequences, we ship all the stuff again, wasting time, network bandwidth, and money. With IMF, you just ship the blue stuff. So instead of shipping 100 gigs, you ship 5 gigs. So instantly you get time and bandwidth and personnel savings by that process. But there's one thing that scares people to death in IMF, that there are no file names. We don't use file names because file names are fragile. Anybody here never lost a file on their computer? No, I'm lying, I have. No, it's good. Either nobody's put their hands up because they're too shy, or they realize that file names are fragile. So we use file names. The first reaction I normally get is, are you mad? Everybody uses file names. It's the only way to find stuff. That usually comes from people who've never used S3 Object Store. But if we don't use file names, we're making things automation friendly. We have unique IDs for each asset, each thing, each clip, each segment, each insert has a unique ID. So we can track and audit and report on everything down to each individual word in a subtitle file if we want to. This is why it's important to Dalet. Because in order to get the benefits of IMF, you need to be able to track. You need to be able to remember what's happened, where you stored stuff, how you moved stuff, how you're going to manage stuff, how you're going to archive stuff, and how do you regress back to the previous working version when somebody made a mistake in edits. All of this management of data and management of information is key to making IMF a financial success. In other words, we need to get automation to do all the boring things that humans aren't good at, so we get the humans doing the good editorial stuff, which makes better programs which people want to watch, which is what really generates the money. And as Matthew's already pointed out, we have put the IMF data structures into the core of the MAM, so that we're able to natively ingest and understand an IMF package. We've got automation interfaces so that we can render out IMF packages. And we've got ways of visualizing IMF, because this stuff gets quite complicated by the time you have tens of thousands of different packages. And all of that can be put into the orchestration engine so that when we start to do versioning, we can automatically generate IMF-type versions and ship them off to Netflix. And very soon we'll be able to bring in IMF packages that are being synthesized by the Hollywood studios and by other people who are adopting IMF around the world. So IMF is definitely coming.